What's new and exciting in phones from Mobile World Congress?
And what should you look for in a new phone anyway?
Hi there. Welcome back to Vertical Hold Behind the Tech News, the award winning tech podcast where we catch up with Australia's leading technology journalists and commentators to dive into the big tech stories of the week. I'm Alex Kidman, and Adam Turner is still, strangely, nowhere to be seen. Now, I thought a couple of days ago that I heard a noise coming from that big stack of collapsed ancient feature phones at the back of the Vertical Hold studio. Might have been him crying for help. But frankly, that stack is huge. I'm a busy man. I've got a podcast to be getting on with, so I'm not going to go digging around in there. It feels a bit dangerous, to be honest with you. So, I've called in some emergency helper hosts to get through this week's show. From Pickr, it's Leigh Stark.
Hey, how you going?
I'm doing well, Leigh. I'm doing well. Now, Leigh, if you were going to get trapped under a stack of gadgets, what gadget is it most likely going to be?
I think I'd have to say the Chumby. Do you remember the Chumby?
You'd have a stack of chumbies? Like, that's how you want to go?
That's because they're plushy. It's going to be so comfortable, and no one's ever going to look at them. So I'll have like a whole abundance of screens that are useless and a cushion.
Smothered to Death by Chumbies just sounds like the worst B-grade horror film ever.
It's like Tribbles in Star Trek, except, Chumbies.
Also joining us to talk tech news from Whistleout, Australia, it's Alex Horosh.
How's it going?
It's going well, Alex. It's always great, of course, to have an extra Alex around the place. I will never complain about that. So, Alex, when you go, what pile of gadgets is going to do you in?
Right now, I think it's going to be like headphones. I've got too many headphones around right now, and it's probably like more a strangulation thing, but they're all wireless, so I don't know how that's going to work out for me.
Well, I suppose if they're little bud headphones, you could choke on them or something, but that's a really grim kind of thought. Let's make this a happy, positive podcast instead and move away from this topic. Now, long-time listeners will probably be aware that around this time of year, we typically tend to bring you Vertical Hold live from Barcelona, home of Mobile World Congress, where typically I'd be sitting chatting with Leigh and Alex over a few drinks and a plate of fine Spanish food. Oh, I can almost taste it now. Except that, well, I can't taste it because we're not there this year. But we are here to dissect the news that's come out of MWC, as well as to give more general advice to our listeners around what they should really focus on when making their next mobile phone purchase. But before we start all that, because it's not all mobile phone news this week, I wanted to grab Leigh and Alex's quick takes on some of the bigger news stories of the week that weren't coming out of Mobile World Congress. Although we are going to start off with, well, it's sort of a phone-related story. Alex, why is Boost Mobile, the MVNO, so pissed at Optus?
So last week, Optus announced speed boosts for its mobile and internet plans. So if you're an Optus NBN customer, you can pay a few dollars to take your plan from NBN 50 to NBN 1000 for the day. And similarly for mobile, they're testing speed boosts in beta, which gives them 5 free speed boosts per month that get them an hour of network priority. So that might be really useful in times of network congestion. But they're called boosts. And
I think I see where the problem lies.
Yeah, Boost has not been very, very happy about the prominent use of the word boost in the sense of another telco.
I can see that. I mean, we're not a branding podcast. Leigh, do you think this idea of paying extra for boosts for a network that presumably can take it anyway is good value for consumers, though?
I like the idea on the internet side of things. I'm a little bit confused by the mobile side of it. At least on the internet, to me, it makes sense. If you have a 50 or 100 and you do need that extra speed, I can see kind of the validity there. But with phones, it kind of stumps me because you already should get fast speeds on a 4G. Look, I was thinking the other day, do you remember when 4G could get you, 200 and 300 and 500 megabits before we called that 5G? These days, 5G speeds aren't that fast anyway, and it's network dependent. So, to me, getting those extra 5 free boosts, which will apparently cost money later on, seems kind of silly on mobile. But on the net side, I can kind of see it.
So it's like, the first taste is free, but then you've got to pay kind of thing.
Yeah, kind of.
But I agree with you that network variability, I think, is going to make the mobile version of this really problematic. And that is, of course, presuming Optus continues to call them boosts. I don't want
Well,
to weigh in on the legal side of it, but unless you gentlemen have some legal training I'm not aware of.
I am not a lawyer, but I will point out that Exitel and Superloop also have speed boosts and have had, or at least Exitel has had them for a while, but only on the NBN side, not on the mobile. And so on the Optus website, they're explicitly called mobile boosts. So that's probably raising some red flags. But it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out because essentially Optus's response has been that it's unlikely that a reasonable cost, like the average customer, is going to confuse a feature on one of Optus's plans with a telco.
Which
And
is
like I'm too
It
ingrained
feels
in
like a
the
very long
industry.
bow, yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, but at the same time, you can kind of understand why Boost wants to defend its trademark.
Well, they sort of have to, I think. Again, I'm not a lawyer, although the Exitel bit feels like what I think lawyers call prior art. If we have lawyer listeners, please give us some feedback on this one or an opinion if you're willing to do so without it incurring billable hours. Moving right along, although again, still staying in the phone world, I guess. Rumors are suggesting that the iPhone SE fourth gen, which a lot of rumors had already suggested was a bit of a dead duck that they weren't going to do, might not be so dead. Gentlemen, do we think that we will see a new, cheaper iPhone this year?
Oh, well, the rumors suggest that we're not actually going to see it until 2024 anyway. But they're quite interesting as now they're saying it's going to be pretty much an iPhone based on the iPhone 14 rather than going on with the classic iPhone SE design with the home button and 4.7-inch display. And like, if that's the case, I think that's the right call.
It's
Having
absolutely the
tested,
right call. That the design is so dated and problematic too.
yeah, like going back to that design when reviewing the iPhone SE last year just felt weird and like it had really gone past its prime. So like a more affordable 6.1-inch iPhone is going to be great for customers,
I,
and it seems like a no-brainer for Apple, just especially for markets where it isn't going to be selling like iPhone 14 Pro Maxes.
the question for me is, what will the difference be? Like, if by the time this comes out in 2024 and it's basically like an iPhone 14 versus an iPhone 15, I'm very curious what the difference will be. And I'm that one person that wishes they didn't take the mini out of the equation, because even though it was technically it was tiny, I liked the fact that they still made a small phone. It bothers me that the iPhone SE is their smallest phone now, because as you said, it's a little bit too small. Design's very out of date, and you couldn't really stuff a high quality screen, despite the fact that the rest of the package was good. But that's the question for me: is what will an iPhone SE in that style do differently from like an iPhone 15 or an iPhone 50, like the standard range of iPhones that'll be popping out?
Well, I think the big change, if it is based on the iPhone 14 design, is that Apple will stop selling the iPhone 14
Mm.
so that nobody tries that particular comparison. One of the other interesting rumors within that, although it would fit better if it's coming next year, is the idea that this will also be the generation where Apple starts using its own 5G modems. Now, they bought Intel's 5G business a long time ago, years and
Mm.
years ago, but so far they've been very reliant on Qualcomm for 5G parts. Alex, do you think one of my dreams might come true, and this might be, or this year's, if they go with 5G for the 15s, might be millimeter wave as well?
That's really hard to tell, just because like no one seems interested in selling millimeter wave phones in Australia. We went through the Galaxy S23 launch, and once again, it's just sub six, and like it's such an
Google
odd
loves
one.
us.
Yeah, Google does, but no one else. Like, there's just a handful of millimeter wave devices available in Australia, and like, it's hard to even say like how much connectivity there is. It just feels like a bit dead in the water right now.
Well, I hear if you go to the cricket ground, you can actually get high speed activity around there. But that's the point. There's not a lot of millimeter wave activity, despite the fact that telcos are beginning to invest in it.
Now, Leigh, I know you're a man who does not like to be away from home. So I've got some great news for you coming out of China. Scientists have invented and patented a long distance kissing robot.
Oh, Oh, wow.
So you can send your wife a kiss when you're not there, and she can receive it via a pair of robotic lips.
I mean, the audience can't see me rubbing my eyes to think that this is super. I can already do that. It's called a kiss emoji and an X. I mean, I don't need a device for this. And honestly, this thing I'm looking at it right now really looks quite risque,
Horrifying is the
lewd.
word you're looking
Yeah,
for.
yeah. I mean, it's like it's a pulsating set of lips, and I got to be honest. If I brought that through an airport to say, "Hey, honey, I'm going to be in Vegas for CES, but I want to make sure I bring one of these so that we can still kiss remotely," I'm relatively sure that the people at the borders would look at me, pull that apart, and go, "That's not for your lips," or not, not yeah.
I reckon you get through customs just fine because they just break down laughing.
Probably, but microphones trigger people at customs and immigration. They pull them apart, going, "What is this?" And you have to open them. This frightens me looking at it remotely. I mean, imagine pulling.
I'm just imagining when it goes like full Skynet and like starts fighting.
Oh, so you start kissing and you say, "So can you kiss? Can you feel me kissing to your partner?" It's like, "No, that's not me." What if it gets intercepted? What if I accidentally kiss the co-host of this show remotely?
Leigh, that was a one-time thing. It's never happening again.
Oh.
Okay, so Mobile World Congress time has come, and in fact, when you're listening to this, gone. The big mobile trade show in Barcelona, which is not just phones, it's all sorts of gadgets, it's network, it's telecommunications, it's all sorts of things these days. And we are not there, but we've all been keeping an eye on what's been announced. And I sort of, because there's so many things going on at MWC, I sort of wanted to focus in on a few brands where we've got better odds of seeing things. So, I mean, kicking off, just choosing a brand at random, TCL. They announced new phones, which we probably won't see here in Australia, I understand.
Which is interesting considering they've kind of brought most of them here to date.
Mm.
Or at least many of them.
Because these are their new 40 series phones, which, Alex, I believe are destined for the States.
Yes, they are, but I think it's likely that, those are specific variants destined for the US that might support their frequencies, and then we'll see a slightly different variation on the same phone later in the year.
In the past, we've seen TCL, mostly mid-range and attempt the low end of the high end, I guess you want to call that. And this year, it's all pretty much squarely focused on mid-range. It's almost like, hey, we've given up on high end, just stick to budget, stick to mid-range. That's where we want to go.
I feel that's a fairly common trajectory for a lot of brands where, like, cool, we'll give high end a crack. We're going to compete against Apple and Samsung. And then, like, 2 years later, it's like, shit, we can't compete against Apple and Samsung. And I mean, like, that's a problem with, a duopoly in its set. Like,
The other thing that TCL had, or at least that they were showing off, were new tablets with their. I've never been clear if it's Next paper or NXT paper. Leigh, which is it and what is it?
I call it NXT paper because I know they want me to call it Next paper, but it doesn't read that way, and I don't care what anyone at TCL says. If you're listening, TCL reps, word it for us at one point.
Put an E in there.
Yeah, put an E in there. Yeah, I lowercase it. I think mostly just to annoy them because I'm not going to use their official branding. But it's basically a screen technology.
Bad boy of tech journalism.
This is why nobody likes me. And also they're answering every question with enterprise. NXT paper is basically a screen technology that tries to kind of be a midway point between a standard LCD and electronic ink. It's effectively a low lights, unreflective style of screen. Really specific. It's mostly for people who complain about their tablets being bad for their eyes. That is a very small amount of people. No one's ever complaining about an iPad screen, despite the fact that it has high reflectivity. So small amount of people. At least TCL is doing something different, but it's got to be a small demographic of people who want Android tablets as it is already, and it's very similar to what you were saying before, Alex. There are two Alexes here. It's hard to say. It's very hard to what you were saying before.
No, you just say Alex and you're automatically right.
I'm talking about all the Alexes.
Easiest show ever.
That's right. It's very much like you're saying the duopoly. You're basically competing mostly against Apple in tablets, but you do have occasionally Samsung in there. And TCL does produce tablets, but I can't imagine any of them are as anywhere near as successful as either of those two brands.
Well, keeping with Chinese brands and actually jumping into that more premium space, we have Oppo, and This wasn't strictly speaking an MWC announcement, but this is a phone that we are going to see here in Australia, the Oppo Find N2 Flip, a foldable, another foldable. And as the listeners will know, I love me a foldable. Alex, do you like a foldable? Are you excited for the Find N2 Flip?
I am excited for the Find It Into Flip, Alex. Mostly because it seems like, we were talking about competition, and for a long time in Australia, Samsung's been like really uncontested in the foldable space. I mean, like globally. And this is Oppo's first foldable that's launching outside of China full stop. And
Mm.
it's got some like really interesting innovations. So it's a flip phone style foldable, as the name suggests. And like if you look at the Z Flip 4, the external display is really small. It can kind of be like a pain in the ass to actually, check a notification, and you then just kind of
If it's
end
a
up
pain
opening.
there, you're putting the phone in the wrong pocket. Just to be clear.
Especially
Oh no!
especially
Oh
if it
my!
heats up. Can I interest you in a kissing gadget?
Sorry, do go on.
Whereas, uh,
I have
whereas
broken my guest.
Sorry.
I'm a bad host.
But the external display on the Find N2 Flip is a lot larger and can like show up to 6 notifications at once, for example. So one of those things where you're less likely to have to unfold the phone to get value out of it. The battery is also 500 milliamp hours bigger, which is another positive sign, given like my experience with the Galaxy Z Flip family is they've all struggled to last the full day.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah, and the screen is also what Oppo's calling creaseless. Having seen the original Find N, it's not quite creaseless, but from a lot of angles, it may as well be. So it's just the kind of like innovations that kind of address some pain points that Samsung hasn't addressed, and hopefully is that kind of thing that really like ramps up competition in the foldable market. And well, no matter what phone you're buying, you get a better product. It's like competition drives innovation. Like, and if no one's forcing Samsung to be better, why would they?
What I want to know is why it's the Find N2 Flip, which is really hard to say, where Flippin' 2 is right there.
You need to be on the marketing team for Oppo. And Michael, if you're listening, maybe hire one of the Alexes, or both of the Alexes at this point, to be your spokespeople.
Call me. But actually, so speaking of flippables and foldables, the competition for Samsung would be Motorola. And while their first gen RIZR, I don't think, or virtually nobody
One person reviewed. Yeah.
The more recent one
because
has been
it kind of fell apart.
Well, there was that problem,
Yeah.
yes. Their more recent update to that was reviewable, and I actually thought it was a pretty decent phone and definitely a solid little competitor to the Flip. They've done some really interesting things with innovation at MWC, haven't they, Leigh?
Yeah, they've got rollable phones. I mean, again, the idea of a phone.
So explain rollable phones. Sorry, this is not like a marble-shaped phone that I spin down the street, is it?
Yeah. So my understanding of this, and
It is.
And Alex, one of the Alexes will correct me, is that actually before Moto started doing this, I think Oppo had a variant of something like this as well. But the idea that the screen actually kind of unfurls and rolls out using a small motor to kind of extend in your hand. So it's a foldable in the way that the screen is flexible, but the phone itself actually unfurls in front of your hand and kind of extends.
So I actually had some hands-on time with this concept phone at the end of last year, and it's really neat. It's like it's not something that's at all commercially ready. Like it feels really fragile. At some points where you tap the screen, it just kind of dips down a little, especially near where the motor is. But it is just like that very kind of like science fiction pipe dream that's just like really neat to kind of have the screen like rise up and get larger.
And
it's just like, that kind of thing. It's just like, wait, technology shouldn't do this. Like, how is this happening?
And for folks who don't really understand the idea, imagine holding your standard candy bar phone, so your standard iPhone, something like that. Imagine holding your standard block phone, and it's actually 5 inches, but it's long, but not as long as we normally see from phones. And instead of unfolding, like opening up a flip phone, little motor just kind of extends the screen out in your hand, so it becomes 6.5 inches. That's the idea.
Sort of stretching like taffy kind of idea, but it's not.
Very much so. It's such a neat idea. And I love the idea of it being small enough to stick in my pocket. But I also, by the same token, one of the things I love about flip phones is that they fold up. I don't like the thickness of them; they're chunky. But I like the fact that they fold up and they're always kind of protecting the screen. And that's the thing that actually kind of bothers me about this thing. Very much,
it's a chunky beast.
It's a chunky beast, and this will actually once this opens up, it's probably going to be slightly fragile. But as you said, Alex, one of the Alexes, any of the Alexes chime in, it's a kind of a prototype thing. It's not ready yet. But again, a good way of seeing kind of like the future of phones, and also we get to see Motorola play with their names. It's not a RIZR, it's a RIZR.
That name
Hey,
is awful. I was just about to say
it's
it's
terrible.
chunky, which is problematic, but it also has the worst name, RIZR.
Well, look, it's not
RIZR.
as bad as the Rocker. Do you remember the Rocker phone? The
The first
original, the
iTunes phone.
first
I mean,
iTunes phone. Yeah,
so they've got form and bad names. What they also showed off, and this interested me particularly because, again, as the regular listeners will know, I'm not so much into flip phones, I'm into fold phones. I want things that start big and get even larger. Was Motorola parent Lenovo showed off sort of the same technology that they're using in the RIZR in a laptop. So this is
that
a laptop that sort of starts out, I think it's like a 4:3 screen arrangement, and you end up with two stacked 16:9 screens on top of each other.
it's a neat play on the idea, and Lenovo is playing with foldable laptops probably more aggressively than really anyone, I guess, outside of Asus.
Hmm.
It is really interesting as a concept. It does scream as one of the
Hmm.
Alexes have said, very like not really production ready. I think one of the
Hmm.
articles said you can actually hear the motors working, so that's clearly not quite ready. But I love the idea that someone is trying something very different because, as all of us know, laptops invariably get stale. They get faster, they're smaller, the batteries are better, but by and large, when you upgrade to a new laptop, you're just getting a new variation of what you had. To see someone try something different and to actually fit more screen size in a smaller space, okay, I'm actually all for that. I like the idea of carrying a bigger computer in a small space.
Yeah, because again, like, when I've traveled, I've normally like pack my iPad just to use as an external display for my MacBook. Because like some work's just easy with two screens. Like
Absolutely.
this seems like a really elegant solution where if you can just extend your display, then that entire removes the need to cart around an iPad or one of the espresso displays.
It's going to suck when you try and extend that thing in flight.
But it depends. It depends if you're in business class or economy. If you're in
That is
economy, it's
true.
going to suck. In business class, it might be, hey, mine's like yours. Hey, hi, friend.
Yeah, a little bit tricky, I suppose, keeping your work private and secure if it's under an NDA. Um, one of the companies that we have so often seen do these kind of crazy out there innovations, especially in the phone space, is Huawei. And well, this year they didn't. There
Yeah.
wasn't a Huawei phone that I'm aware of. That they showed off a watch. Is Huawei just not trying outside of China anymore, Alex?
I mean, why would it? It's just like it's in a really hard position
Mm.
where just like without access to Google services, which is all of the Western world relies on for Android phones, and just like for the apps in general, no matter what operating system you're using, it's like in a really tricky position where like it's gonna be hard for it to have a product that actually people want to use, and it sucks because Huawei was like one of those really innovative forces driving competition. Huawei had a smartphone with two rear cameras before Apple or Samsung or HTC.
Mm,
It's really frustrating watching this happen. I mean, there are a lot of things that have happened in that time, but it's really Huawei was for a long time the first camera, like the first phone company that actually properly used a heritage camera brand for a good reason, other than just a
mm.
brand name tie-in. When you get brand name tie-ins these days, but you know before Xiaomi, Huawei was making Leica really work for it. This new devices, the Watch GT Cyber, I've largely stopped reviewing Watch GT devices, not because I don't want to, but because there's not a lot of audience for them in
Mm.
Australia. This new model is basically a coin that you can push out of a really, honestly, ugly case. And I don't really understand. Like, okay, ignoring the fact that it's got cyber in the title, just all the things, just yeah, all the reasons to make fun of it would start there. But I just don't see. I mean, Huawei watches are better than they've been before, but there's not a lot of reason to pick one in Australia. You've got a Google, you've got Samsung devices, which are quite good, and you've obviously got the Apple devices. Granted, if you're on an Android phone, your best bet is probably going to be something that has more support locally. And Huawei's App Store is not always super friendly with Android devices. And sometimes it actually works better with iOS devices, which is super confusing at times.
It's crazy. Although, to give them their due, they are at least trying something innovative. I mean, as opposed to you can throw new watch bands on this, you're talking about literally taking the watch face, the watch internals, except for the bezel, basically,
Mm,
out of this thing to pop into a different bezel and strap.
Oh yeah, no, it's a really clever design.
mm.
Like you have to give them props.
Absolutely. It was like last year. One of my favorite devices last year was Huawei's blood pressure watch. I thought the idea was really cool. It was ugly, but it did things nothing else in the market did. And I know when Apple eventually unveils, blood pressure tracking,
Hmm.
in the same style, everyone's going to be like, "Wow, amazing! We know Huawei has done this before it." But that doesn't necessarily make it any more usable for most people. And I think that's the frustrating thing. What it's really hard to say to anyone, no matter how good a Huawei foldable devices when they popped up, or even a Huawei watch, go buy one, because the App Store experience is just so broken as you jump across the operating systems.
Well, I mean, speaking of phones that are kind of easy to use and easy to operate, um, HMD, the guys who own the rights to produce Nokia phones, had a release of mostly kind of budget models, but what might be my favorite phone of MWC, the Nokia G22. This is a repairable phone. Leigh, why would I be excited about a phone that they're telling me could already break?
I think that the idea of the repairable phone is a good one, because we do live in that era of wanting full transparency, the ability to replace parts on our devices, and some people will actually be able to fix this themselves if they want to. It's a mid-range. It's actually more of a budget phone. In fact,
Hmm.
everything Nokia announced was basically a budget phone.
It's what,
It's a
$349, I
Yeah,
think?
349. They all kind of sit below that. What was weird to me was that it's a really cool idea having a collaboration with a fixing company and to actually have a phone that you can replace the parts of. I am stumped that it's a 4G only phone. That really shocked me.
Does it matter though? Like, yeah, it's just like the promise of 5G has been largely undelivered.
Mm,
Like we've been to so many Mobile World Congresses where we've like sat through splashy keynotes talking about 20 gigabits per second speeds and remote surgeries through VR headsets and self-driving cars and all of these wonderful things that 5G is going to enable. But so far, it feels like it's just pushed up mobile plan prices.
that's
And it's
fair.
just like I
But
can download like an album on Spotify really quickly before getting onto a flight. But planes have in-flight Wi-Fi now.
yeah, but the in-flight Wi-Fi is awful. I think I see Lee's point though, because at 349, this is the Nokia G22 we're talking about. I just realized we hadn't named the thing. Uh, at 349, the Nokia G22 is just under the price point of the cheapest 5G phones you can buy. I think that puts it in that awkward space. I think if you were talking like true budget, like sub 200 kind of phones, yes, you'll absolutely have a market there that's not going to care and that is not particularly going to necessarily even be with a telco that's going to offer them 5G or in an area that where 5G might be offered. At that price point, though, it feels like it's achingly close to the price where we should be able to say, well, 5G should just be assumed. Actually, one of the other things that we've seen over the years at Mobile World Congress is an increasing focus on charging speed because everyone hates having a flat phone battery. And Oppo's stablemate Realme showed off 240-watt charging on the Realme GT3. This is like 0 to 100% in 10 minutes or less, or something like that.
Mm.
Alex, at what point are these phones just going to catch fire?
I really hope they're not. We don't want to see like a Note 7 debacle
I was
again.
waiting for
Like,
that.
but like these are all like really ambitious claims, and like on one hand, I'm really into the idea because they're theoretically the kind of things that can change how you use your phone and kind of free you from that nightly routine of having to make sure it's topped up before bed. And she's like, oh no, like I'll just
I
plug
feel
it
like there's
in
an
for
admission
five
coming
minutes.
here.
There actually isn't.
Fair enough. Do go on. Do go on.
Yeah, but if you can just like plug your phone in like for 5 minutes whenever and have it be pretty much fully charged, I think that creates a lot of extra flexibility in terms of like your life, like how your lifestyle and your phone interact. But like the counterpoint is that with charging speeds this fast, like what does it mean for battery health?
I have a weird counterpoint to all these high speed phone charging things. Like a lot of people, I don't actually carry the charging bricks from the phone with me when I go out. And the one I've always found rather interesting about, when you see 120 and 160 and 240 watts is that you do typically have to carry those bricks with you if you want those speeds. So for me,
Mm.
what size is this? And will I have to still just bring that with me anyway? The only counterpoint for me for that is, well, maybe it'll be a small version of something I can charge my laptop with, and it'll use something like gallium nitride, and it'll make it easier to carry a laptop charger around. I don't know.
It's not clear if it is a custom charger, you're right, although their claim is that the recharge cycles should be similar to that of I can't remember the numbers off the top of my head, but the comparison that I saw was entirely similar to that you get from an iPhone in terms of battery charge cycles and the amount it's going to degrade. So presumably they have covered off the chemistry of all of this. Although the other thing with Realme, and correct me if I'm wrong, gentlemen, but
Who are you talking
I
about?
either of you, I don't think I've seen a new Realme phone launch here in Australia for a
I was
couple of
I
years.
was thinking about this the other day. I was opening a box, going, I've got a Realme phone. I probably was supposed to send back, but I haven't seen the brand for probably 2 years now.
Yeah, no, I think they've effectively left the Australian market.
Their
A little bit
website's
of
still up. I did actually go and have
yeah,
a look at this, but yeah,
oh no, a little
everything's
bit of
2 years old or
LinkedIn,
more. Mm.
but a little bit of LinkedIn stalking shows that some of their key executives are now elsewhere in the Oppo family.
Right.
So it just seems like don't have like hard confirmation about this, but it just seems like Realme isn't focusing on Australia anymore. But if you have a Realme phone, you should still be able to, get it fixed, for example, because like Oppo and Realme share the same repair center, so you should still be covered in terms of support, like post-purchase support and the likes.
Yeah, because it's all part of the same, what is it, BBK Electronics or whatever it is,
Mm.
family
Yes,
that also owns OnePlus, if I recall
and the
correctly.
Vivo.
Yes, that's right. But this does mean that we may not see 240-watt charging on a Realme branded phone anytime soon.
Probably
Oppo
on an
seems more
Oppo.
likely. Yeah, seems more likely. We were just talking about lack of 5G the uh, in the new Nokia G22. Telstra had its typical run of MWC announcements, and probably the most consumer centric of those was the idea that parts of its 5G network, instead of having something like a 15-kilometer radius, now have a 100-kilometer radius.
Yeah, that's like it's a really big claim, and I'm really interested to see how this works. And really great on paper, but like in the press release, we talk about doing like 100-kilometer long range 5G data call. So
Mm.
like, is it okay? Cool, you can make phone calls over this distance away from the tower, but what else can you do?
Mm.
It's just like, is it still enough to actually browse the web? To download an app, or are we just kind of it's just like 5G, but it's, effectively, like a
But
megabit per second.
bear in mind that that range will also then extend within that 100-kilometer circle. So, yeah, at 100K, maybe you can only get a phone call, but maybe you're stuck by the side of the road because you're broken down and a phone call is an actual lifesaver in Australia.
Oh, yeah, no, of course. And like, it's still like
And at
a really
50K,
impressive.
maybe you'll get, much better than you were going to get otherwise. And they are eventually going to shift all of this stuff to 5G.
Yeah. Oh, no, and like, it's like seriously impressive achievement. And I
Mm.
just like want to know a bit more about the practicalities of it and like what it actually means for Australians as opposed to it just being, the like really impressive sounding press release type announcement.
So typically at the end of each episode of Late, I've been asking the journalists who have been on the show to give a piece of advice to consumers as the contentious question du jour. And I'm going to mix things up a little bit this week because I'm surrounded by a wealth of talent and knowledge when it comes to smartphones. So, what I was going to ask both of you two gentlemen, and I will chime in with some points as well where appropriate. Lots of people buy new smartphones because they need new smartphones. The old one dies, or they're jumping up from something, or what have you. But I think there are a lot of mistakes made when buying new smartphones. So, Leigh, I'll get you to go first. What would be your first tip to someone looking to buy a new phone?
Oh, just match your budget, to be honest. Know what sort of budget you have going in, to be honest. There's a lot of price differentiation. And typically you can find good phones in any part of the market. We were talking about the iPhone SE earlier. It's still quite a good value iPhone proposition, but know what you're going to spend first, because you can spend an enormous amount of money on something with features that you're not going to use. So set yourself a target. That would be my first step. Step for the whole thing.
Okay, Alex, Whistleout obviously does a lot of work with kind of plans and contracts and things like that. And a lot of people might be thinking, oh, should I buy a phone outright? Should I get something on contract? Should I get it secondhand? What would your advice be in terms of that matrix?
So if you can afford to buy your phone outright, I think that's always a better option, as it gives you more flexibility about what provider you can go with. So if you want to buy a phone on the plan, you're largely limited to Telstra, Optus, and Vodafone, sometimes Woolworths Mobile. And those providers all tend to be pretty pricey. You're looking at least $45 per month for a plan from Vodafone, for example, and that's kind of the cheapest option out of the big three. But then if you own your phone outright, you can pick from a whole host of smaller providers that where plans can start for as little as $10 per month. And a $10 per month plan might not be right for everyone because, the data tends to be pretty limited, like maybe like up to 5 GB per month. But, you've still got a lot more flexibility in terms of your monthly spend on your plan itself. Like there's a whole host of really good plans around the $20 to $30 mark between 20 to like 50 GB. And for a lot of people, that'll be enough.
And the reality there in that market, and again, if you haven't changed providers or plans for a while, you might not have thought about this, is you don't really get a subsidized phone when you get one through one of those big contract providers anymore. It's just chopped up into monthly payments, isn't it?
That's correct. Like phone subsidies are all but gone. Sometimes like telcos will like put on a pretty decent discount, but you can only get if you're buying a phone on the plan. Like right now, Optus is offering $500 off the iPhone 13. So, older iPhone, but still like a pretty good deal. But the catch is, you have to stay for like the entire 24 to 36 month period. Otherwise, you forfeit the remainder of the discount.
Oof, a 36-month contract. Oof.
I mean, most people keep their phone for over 3 years these days.
Okay.
And people are
Yeah,
kind of lazy. Like there's a convenience in just saying, right, I know where the money's going. It's just going to the telco, so that's that. I agree. The 36-month contract does not appeal to me, but I understand why it happens. Slightly more contentious one to throw out there. I'll throw this to Alex first. Are premium smartphones, so the iPhones, the Galaxy S's, and the like, still worth the money?
I think this comes back to what Leigh was saying earlier, where it comes down to your individual needs. And I'd personally buy the iPhone 14 Pro Max myself because it's got like a god tier battery that just doesn't die, and one of my favorite cameras on the market. And I'm taking advantage of those features. And I'm a person who will notice the difference in photo quality compared to like last year's iPhone. But that doesn't mean it's the right phone for everyone. And if you're not taking a lot of photos, or you don't need that kind of silly battery life because you're on your phone all day, like work wise, then it's probably not a good buy for you. And especially when the 2021 iPhone 13 is now like cheaper and a great iPhone for a lot of people that has the same processor as the iPhone 14. I think like another thing to consider though with the premium space is the support life, because and how long you want to keep your phone for, because when you look at cheap Android phones, they might not even come with like any guarantees around software or security updates, and like that's not great. Like Samsung has gotten a lot better in the space and are actually making some pretty decent promises around the A series, where you actually do have a commitment in terms of software updates and security updates, which kind of guarantees that like your phone's up to date and secure, both good things. But like some of the other budget brands aren't as good as that. Where oh yeah, cool, like we'll give you one software update in a year, but other than that, good luck.
You're not talking about Motorola, are you?
Perhaps, but
Motorola's gotten better. Nokia's a good standout there. They've
Mm.
Since they relaunched as a brand, they've done multi-year. But you're right. There's a bunch of brands where it's a bit of a guessing game. Leigh,
yeah.
Leigh, would you agree around premium phone value?
Yeah, I'm actually exactly the same. It's one of those things. You might use some of the features, you might not. There are amazing features in premium phones if you look. I don't so much care about the battery life in the iPhone. For me, as Alex said, it's the camera. That camera to me is stunning. I know people who have adopted the iPhone 14 Pro camera and said, I don't need to use my SLRs anymore because some of the things it can do are actually comparable. It's not quite the same, but it is quite good. And I know people who love the pen feature on the S22 previously, and they'll probably love it on the S23. The reality is that some of the features, if you can really make them work for your life, then yeah, that phone is absolutely worth it because, as Alex said before, people are holding their phones for much longer. You can keep using phones until they basically die, and some of them keep going. I mean, you can still keep using phones, but if you're going to spend on that, I would make sure to get as much out of the phones as you can because phones are expensive. You know, you're hitting between the $2 and $3 sometimes, depending on what you buy. So if you do buy one of those phones and you're not quite sure why you did, explore the amazing reviews written by any of these three people, plus the amazing other reviews that you can find in Australia. Australian reviews are often very different from international ones because we also test local stuff. Explore their reviews to find out the features that you're missing or might not be playing with because you will get more out of your phone once you know what it can do.
Well, that just about wraps up this week's episode of Vertical Hold. Thanks to Leigh for stepping into the Vertical Hold host chair.
Thank you. It's a comfy chair.
And now, because we did the phone buyer's guide, you only get 2 Vertical Hold questions of
Will
doom
one of them
from
involve
you.
a Starship Enterprise question?
It will not.
Okay.
Very easy, very simple. Where can people find your work online, and where can they find you on social media?
You can find my work online at Pickr, pickr.com.au, and you can find me on Twitter at Lilo.
Excellent. And also thanks to Alex for doubling the proportion of people called Alex in the studio this week.
It's always a pleasure to double the amount of Alexes.
And likewise, you get the same 2 questions. Where do you work, and how can people find you on social media?
I'm at whistleout.com.au and reviews.org/au, and you can find me on Twitter at _Choros, which is CHOROS.
Fantastic. And as always, you can catch us online at Vertical Hold AU on Twitter, at the Vertical Hold Facebook page, or on the web at verticalhold.com.au. And were Adam able to dig himself out of that pile of feature phones, he would right now be telling everyone, thanks everyone for listening in. Don't forget to drop us a line and tell us what you love about the show, as well as what we could do better in 2023.
Do you think Adam would be buried alive by the amount of Alexes that we could stuff into the show?
And
We could
we
put
could
a
have an
lot of
Alex
Alexes into
extravaganza.
this show.
How many
This
Alexes
is a
are in
great
tech?
idea. This is
How
a
many
great idea.
Alexes are in tech journalism? How many Alexes does it take to fill a vertical hold?